The desert stretched far and wide, endless and unforgiving, with the blazing sun hanging high above like a fiery torch. The land was silent except for the dry whisper of the wind moving across the rocks and sand. In the middle of this empty place walked a lone figure, an Apache woman named Nayeli. Her steps were slow and uneven, her strength nearly gone, but she forced herself forward. Though every breath hurt her chest, her skin burned under the sun, her lips cracked from thirst, and her eyes, once filled with life, now looked tired and full of pain. Only a few days before, Nayeli had lived among her people, the Apache tribe who had raised her since childhood. She had laughed with the children, carried water from the stream, and sat by the fires listening to the elders tell stories of warriors and spirits. But all of that was behind her now. Illness had weakened her body, and when she could no longer keep pace with the demands of daily survival, her tribe had made a choice. They had whispered among themselves, their faces hard and voices sharp. The decision had been made quickly. Nayeli was to be left behind. It was not unusual in those times. The tribe could not afford weakness. Every person had to contribute, or else the group would suffer. And so one morning, while the campfire still glowed and the dawn was only beginning, they had led her out to the desert's edge. Her pleas had fallen on ears that no longer listened. "You will find your path," they said, though their eyes would not meet hers. Then they turned away, their footsteps fading, leaving her alone. Now the desert was her only companion. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as though the sand itself tried to pull her down. The sun beat on her head like a hammer, making her dizzy and weak. Her stomach cried out with hunger, but there was no food. Her throat was so dry she could barely swallow. Around her, the land offered no kindness, only jagged rocks, thorny bushes, and wide stretches of emptiness. Above her, vultures circled. Their wings cast shadows across the ground, moving slowly in circles, waiting. Nayeli knew what they wanted. They were patient creatures. They had seen many wanderers fall before, and they could sense when someone was close to the edge of life. She tried not to look at them, but their presence pressed on her mind. A constant reminder that she was no longer seen as a woman, but as prey. Her feet stumbled, and she nearly fell. She caught herself on a rock, scraping her hands, but she didn't cry out. Her tears had dried long ago. She forced herself to rest against the stone, feeling its heat burn her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to imagine the sound of running water, the laughter of her tribe, the safety of the camp. But when she opened her eyes again, there was only the desert, wide, merciless, and empty. She thought of the moments leading to her exile. She remembered her mother's face, sorrowful yet silent as the men spoke of her weakness. She remembered the whispers of women who said she was cursed, that the spirits had turned from her. She remembered the children watching with wide eyes, not understanding why she was being pushed away. Most of all, she remembered the sound of footsteps leaving her behind, fading until there was only silence. That silence had become her world now. Nayeli tried to keep walking. She knew that if she stayed still, she would never rise again. Each step, though painful, gave her a small sense of defiance. If her tribe had abandoned her, she would not surrender easily. She would walk until her legs refused, until her body gave out completely. But deep down, she feared the end was near. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tight, her vision blurred from the heat. The desert played tricks on her eyes. In the distance, she thought she saw water, a shimmering pool reflecting the sunlight. Her heart leapt with hope, and she dragged herself toward it, only to find dry sand waiting for her. Again and again, the desert teased her with illusions, making her believe salvation was near, only to laugh at her weakness. The vultures grew bolder. They swooped lower, their wings flapping with heavy sounds. Their sharp eyes watched her every move, their patience stretched thin. One landed on a rock nearby, tilting its head, studying her. Nayeli stared back at it, her eyes filled with both fear and defiance. "Not yet," she whispered with a voice so faint even she barely heard it. The bird only spread its wings, as though reminding her that time was short. She pressed on, her shadow stretching long across the sand as the sun began to move westward. Her mind wandered between memories and dreams. She thought of the songs her grandmother used to sing, songs of strength and survival, songs that told of women who faced great trials and found their spirits reborn. Nayeli tried to hum, but her throat was too dry to carry a tune. Still, she clung to those memories, letting them guide her feet. As the hours passed, her legs finally gave out and she collapsed onto the ground. The sand burned her skin, but she lacked the strength to move. Her arms shook as she tried to push herself up, but they failed. Lying there, staring at the endless sky, she felt a heavy weight settle over her. The desert had won. Her tribe had won. Even the vultures had won, waiting for the moment she would no longer move. But even in that moment of despair, a small spark of will remained in her. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the strength to face what was coming. She prayed to the spirits of her ancestors to guide her soul if her body could no longer continue. The desert wind brushed against her face, carrying the dry scent of dust and sage. The sound of wings filled the air as more vultures gathered circling above. The shadows grew darker, larger, closer. Nayeli felt the chill of fear crawl across her skin. Though the sun still burned hot, she wondered if this was how her story would end. Alone, abandoned, and left for the creatures of the sky. Yet even in her weakness, her eyes remained open, searching the horizon. Somewhere deep inside her she still hoped. Perhaps it was foolish, but hope was the last thing she had. If the desert was a place of death, then maybe, just maybe, it could also surprise her with life. She held on to that thought as tightly as she could, refusing to let it go, even as darkness crept at the edges of her vision. The vultures circled lower, their shadows brushing close to her still body. Nayeli could hear the beating of their wings, heavy and powerful. She could sense them preparing to claim her. Her heart raced weakly in her chest, the only sound left within her. Still, she refused to close her eyes completely. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her surrender. The desert remained silent, but Nayeli's spirit, though fragile, still clung to life. She lay there, trapped between despair and determination, a single figure against the endless sands, and though no one walked beside her, though her tribe had left her, though the vultures believed her theirs, a hidden thread of destiny was already weaving itself in her path. Something unexpected, something beyond the reach of the desert's cruelty. The desert sky had shifted by the time Nayeli awoke from her faintness. The sun was still high but beginning its slow journey toward the west, the light a little softer though still burning her skin. She blinked against the brightness, her body heavy and weak. She tried to lift herself, but her arms trembled and her throat burned with thirst so sharp it felt like fire inside her. She could not remember when she had last tasted water. The vultures had not left. They circled above, patient shadows against the blue sky. A few of them perched on nearby rocks, their dark shapes watching with unblinking eyes. Their wings shifted from time to time, feathers rustling in the dry wind as if they were ready to take what they believed already belonged to them. Their presence filled her with both fear and anger. She hated that they expected her to give in, hated that her tribe had left her to such a fate. She had always been a woman of spirit, a woman of strength. But now she felt as though the desert itself conspired with the vultures to finish her. Her breath rattled in her chest as she lay against the burning ground. She thought of standing, of trying once more to walk, but her legs had no strength. The dry wind picked up, carrying sand across her face, and she closed her eyes tightly to keep it out. She wondered if this was what her ancestors had felt in their last moments, the slow silence of the land closing around them, the heavy sky pressing down. For a moment she almost welcomed it. Perhaps the suffering would finally end. But then she heard something different. At first it was faint, blending with the whisper of the wind. A rhythmic sound, steady, unlike the harsh cries of vultures. Her mind tried to place it, but it seemed impossible. As the sound grew louder, clearer, she realized it was the sound of hooves striking the earth. A horse. Her eyes opened and she forced her head to turn. At first she thought the desert was playing tricks again, giving her another cruel vision. But no, this was real. In the distance, a figure was approaching on horseback. The sunlight cast the rider in shadow, making it hard to see details. But the sound of hooves, the dust rising behind, and the steady movement toward her proved this was no dream. Fear gripped her as much as hope. She did not know who this rider was. Could it be an enemy? Could it be a man who would see her as nothing more than abandoned prey? She tried to move, tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her. She could only lie there helpless as the rider drew closer. The vultures scattered at the sound, lifting into the air with heavy wings, circling higher to wait. The horse slowed as it neared, and the rider dismounted with careful steps. Nayeli's blurred vision cleared enough to see him now. He was a white man, tall, with rough clothes worn from travel, his face shadowed by a wide hat. His horse, strong and dark, snorted and pawed at the ground. unsettled by the sight of the vultures and the still figure of Naeli on the earth. The man stepped closer, cautious, but not unkind. His eyes studied her with concern, not cruelty. He could see her weakness, the dryness of her lips, the exhaustion in her face. She was on the edge of death, and he knew it. For a moment he stood still as though weighing his choices. This was dangerous land, and helping a stranger could mean trouble. But something in him, something quiet yet strong, pushed him forward. Naeli tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came. Her voice was broken, dry as the desert air. She wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but the words failed her. The man knelt beside her, his movements gentle as though afraid to startle her. From his saddlebag he drew out a small flask of water. He lifted her head carefully, holding the flask to her lips. The first drop of water touched her mouth, and her body reacted with desperation. She wanted to drink it all at once, but the man pulled it back slightly, shaking his head. His voice was calm, steady. He spoke words she did not fully understand, but the tone was clear. Too much, too fast would harm her. Slowly, he offered her small sips, and she accepted them. Feeling life stir faintly inside her once again, tears formed in her eyes, though no sound came from her lips. The kindness of this stranger was something she had not expected, something she thought she would never know again. After the tribe had turned away, she believed the world had closed its heart to her. Yet here was this man, unknown to her, risking his water and his time to keep her alive. He gave her a little food, soft pieces of dried bread that she could chew without effort. Again he fed her slowly, patiently, making sure she could handle it. Then he lifted her with surprising care and strength, placing her onto his horse. She was too weak to protest, too weak to even fear. She let herself rest against the saddle as the man mounted and guided the horse forward. The desert moved past them slowly, the steady rhythm of hooves carrying her away from the vultures and the emptiness that had been her prison. She felt the warmth of the man's arm steadying her, keeping her from falling. She could smell the leather of the saddle, the sweat of the horse, the dust of the trail. All of it was real, solid, unlike the illusions the desert had shown her before. Her eyes closed, but this time not in despair. She drifted between wakefulness and sleep, the gentle movement of the horse calming her. Her mind wondered who this man was, why he had chosen to help her. She did not know his name, did not know if he was friend or enemy, but she knew he had saved her from death. Behind them, the vultures circled once more, but farther away now. Their prey had been taken from them, and they would have to wait for another. Naeli no longer felt their shadow pressing close. For the first time since her exile, she felt the smallest sense of safety, fragile though it was. The man led his horse to a place where rocks provided shade, and there he made a small camp. He laid her down gently on a blanket, giving her more water, tending to her with the same quiet care. She watched him through half-closed eyes, noting the lines of hardship on his face, the seriousness in his movements. He was not a man of many words, yet his actions spoke of a heart unwilling to leave someone to die. Night would come soon, and with it the cold of the desert. But Naeli no longer faced it alone. She had been abandoned by her people, left for the vultures to claim, but fate had sent another path into her life. A stranger, a white man, had found her when she was weakest. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, at least, she would live. Her body still trembled with weakness. Her spirit still carried the scars of betrayal, but in her heart a fragile flame began to glow. Perhaps she had been left behind, but perhaps she had been found for a reason. The fire burned low in the circle of stones, throwing faint light into the desert night. The stars stretched endlessly above, brighter than Naeli had ever noticed before. Lying on the blanket near the fire, her body still weak, she felt the cool night air brushing against her skin. After the cruel heat of the day, the cold was sharp and her thin frame shivered. The man who had found her, the stranger on the horse, sat close by, feeding small pieces of wood into the fire to keep it alive. His movements were steady, practiced, the actions of someone who had spent many nights in the wilderness. He had given her water again, only a little, making sure her body could accept it. He had offered her food too, soft pieces she could chew slowly. Now as she rested, her eyes studied him when he was not looking. His face, lit by firelight, seemed weathered by wind and sun. His hair was dark, with strands falling beneath his hat, and his eyes, though serious, held no cruelty. She sensed a firmness about him, but also something she had not seen for many days: kindness. The silence between them was not heavy, but gentle, like the pause between breaths. Nayeli wished she had the strength to ask questions, to know who he was and why he had chosen to stop for her. But her voice remained weak, and her throat still burned from thirst. She managed only a whisper, her words broken. The man turned his head at once, hearing her faint sound. He leaned closer, speaking in English, words she did not know fully but understood in part. His tone was calm, as if to tell her she was safe. Her eyes closed, but not from fear. For the first time since her exile, she allowed herself to rest fully. The warmth of the fire, the steady sound of the horse moving in the background, and the watchful presence of the stranger gave her a comfort she had not thought possible. When morning came, the desert once again revealed its harshness. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the land in red and gold. Nayeli woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling fire. The man was already awake, preparing something in a small pot. He moved with quiet skill, every action purposeful. She lifted her head slightly, and he noticed at once, bringing her a cup with warm broth. He helped her sit up, holding the cup steady as she drank in small sips. Strength returned slowly to her body, though she remained fragile. With each sip of broth, with each careful breath, she felt life pushing back against the darkness that had nearly claimed her. She wanted to thank him to speak, but her words came slowly. She said only a few in her own tongue, not sure he understood. Still, he nodded as if he did. His eyes carried understanding even where words failed. As the day grew brighter, he prepared his horse again. He lifted her gently, placing her on the saddle before him so she would not fall. She felt his arms steady behind her, holding her with care. The horse carried them forward across the desert, its hooves striking the earth with steady rhythm. The vultures were gone now, flying far away, their patience broken. Nayeli no longer felt their shadow. Instead, she felt the strength of the animal beneath her, the strange yet comforting presence of the man behind her. The desert looked different from this height, no longer a place of only death, but a wide land filled with hidden paths. Samuel, that was the name he spoke when pointing to himself, guided the horse toward distant hills. She repeated the name quietly, unsure if her voice carried it correctly, but he smiled faintly when he heard. She touched her chest and whispered, "Nayeli." His nod told her he understood. Their names were exchanged, a small bridge between two worlds. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel stopped in the shade of a rocky outcrop. He helped her down, letting her rest while he tended to the horse. Then he returned, sitting nearby, offering her dried food and water. She ate slowly, though her hunger grew with every bite. The taste was plain but precious, each piece of bread and strip of dried fruit like a gift. She wanted to share something in return, but she had nothing to offer but her story. Though her English was broken, she tried. She used gestures, her hands moving as she spoke, shaping pictures in the air. She told of her tribe, how they had abandoned her when sickness made her weak. She told of the long walk, the pain, the circling vultures. Her voice cracked, her words sometimes failing, but Samuel listened with deep attention. He asked no questions that cut like knives, gave no look of judgment. He simply listened, his eyes steady on hers as though every word mattered. When she finished, silence filled the space. She thought perhaps he would look at her with pity, but he did not. Instead, he nodded as if to say he understood, even if their worlds were different. His silence was not empty, it was respect. For the first time, Nayeli felt the weight of her story lift, shared with someone who did not turn away. The days that followed became a rhythm. Samuel guided the horse across the desert by day, stopping often to let her rest, offering water and food when she needed. At night, he built small fires and they sat close, speaking in gestures, in broken words, in shared silence. He showed her how to use flint to spark flame, how to tie a simple knot with leather strips. She in turn pointed out plants she knew, plants that could soothe pain or ease thirst. In those exchanges, something grew, not just survival, but trust. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Nayeli felt strong enough to walk a little. She moved slowly, her steps uncertain, but Samuel did not stop her. Instead, he walked beside her, letting her test her strength. The desert air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. For a moment, she felt almost free, as though the desert was no longer her enemy, but part of her journey. She looked at Samuel then, the man who had found her when even the vultures had believed she belonged to them. His face was still serious, his manner still quiet, but his presence had become something more than that of a stranger. He was a protector, a guide, perhaps even a friend. She did not know what their path ahead would bring, but she knew she would not face it alone. That night, as she lay by the fire, she thought of the choice that might come. If she grew stronger, could she return to her tribe? Would they even accept her if she appeared again, alive when they had expected her to die? Or should she follow this man, this Samuel, into a new life, one unknown but filled with the promise of respect? The questions lingered in her heart, heavy and uncertain. Yet one truth was clear. She had been left to die, but she had been saved, and in that salvation a new story was being written, one step at a time under the wide desert sky. Days turned into weeks as Nayeli slowly regained her strength under Samuel's care. The desert, once her enemy, no longer felt as cruel. Though the sun still burned during the day and the nights were still cold, she faced them differently now. She had water when she needed it, food when her body demanded it, and fire to keep the darkness away. Most of all, she had Samuel. The man's presence gave her a sense of safety she had not felt even within her own tribe. He asked for nothing in return. He only shared his fire, his food, his horse, and his silence. With every sunrise, Nayeli felt her legs grow stronger. At first, she could only take a few steps from the camp before her body forced her back down. Samuel never rushed her, only watched closely to make sure she did not push too hard. In time, she began to walk longer distances. She would wander a little from the fire, touch the desert plants, and return with a few leaves to show him. With her hands, she explained their uses. One could soothe a burn, another could help with pain, another could stop bleeding when pressed against a wound. Samuel listened carefully, repeating the names she spoke in her tongue. Though his words were not perfect, his effort made her smile. At the same time, Samuel began teaching her. He showed her how to repair the worn saddle straps, how to tie knots with rawhide, and how to set simple snares in the brush. She watched his hands carefully, repeating his actions until she could manage them herself. Once he handed her his knife, its blade sharp and bright. She hesitated at first, but he nodded with trust, guiding her and shaping sticks into sharp points for the fire. These small lessons built a bridge between them, one made of survival, patience, and respect. Nayeli found herself watching Samuel more often, not out of fear but curiosity. She wondered about his life, about the world he had come from. He carried himself like a man who had walked many miles and seen much hardship. Yet his silence was never empty. It was filled with thought. At night, when the fire flickered low, she would glance at him and see him looking into the flames, his eyes deep as though memories haunted him. She wanted to ask, but words were still hard between them. For now, it was enough to sit close, sharing warmth and quiet understanding. One afternoon, as they traveled, a sudden dust storm swept across the land. The sky darkened and the wind roared like a wild beast. Samuel quickly pulled her down from the horse, guiding her toward a low ridge of rocks. He covered her with his coat, pressing her close to shield her from the stinging sand. The storm raged around them, the wind shrieking, sand cutting at their faces, but beneath his arm she felt safe. She could hear his steady breathing, feel the strength of his hold, and it calmed her heart. When the storm finally passed, leaving the desert silent once more, she looked up at him, their faces close. Neither spoke, but in that moment she felt a bond stronger than words. As her health returned, she began to help more. She gathered wood, tended the fire, and even prepared simple meals from what Samuel hunted. Though her skills were different from his, they worked together as though they had always been a team. She no longer felt like a burden, but a companion. The desert, once ready to take her life, had instead given her a chance to learn, to grow, and to see herself not as weak, but as strong. Still, questions pressed at her heart. Should she seek her tribe again? Part of her longed to see familiar faces, to hear the songs of her people once more. Yet another part feared their rejection. Would they welcome her if she returned alive? Or would they cast her out again, calling her cursed? The thought of walking back into their camp, of facing the eyes that had turned away from her, filled her with doubt. Samuel seemed to sense her thoughts even when she did not speak them. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he pointed eastward, where the land stretched beyond sight. He spoke slowly, his English words simple so she could understand. "Here's people there?" His voice carried no judgment, only a question. Nayeli lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer. She touched her chest and shook her head slowly. Then she pointed to the horizon away from her tribe. Samuel nodded as though he understood. He did not press further. The days continued, each one weaving their lives closer together. They shared laughter now, rare but precious whenever Samuel tried to mimic Apache words and twisted their sounds. She would cover her mouth, hiding her smile, but he would catch it anyway. In turn, he taught her English words pointing at things, sky, horse, fire, water, until she repeated them with growing confidence. Their voices, once so foreign to each other, began to find rhythm together. One night after they had eaten, Nayeli told him a story from her childhood. She used her language, her hands, and drawings in the sand to explain. It was about a great hawk who had been wounded but healed through the kindness of a smaller bird. Samuel watched closely, nodding at each part, his eyes soft with understanding. When she finished, she looked at him with meaning. He was the bird who had helped her, lifting her when she could not rise. Samuel did not speak, but his expression told her he knew what she meant. The bond between them was no longer just survival. It was trust growing quietly, rooted deep. Nayeli no longer felt like the abandoned woman left for vultures. She felt alive, renewed, her heart learning to believe again in people. One morning, Samuel handed her the reins of the horse. She looked at him in surprise, but he nodded firmly, placing the leather in her hands. Her fingers tightened, and she climbed carefully into the saddle. He walked beside her, watching closely but allowed her the control. She guided the horse slowly, her body swaying with its steps, her spirit rising with pride. For the first time, she felt not like a passenger but a partner. The trust he placed in her stirred something deep inside. That night, as she lay by the fire, Nayeli thought of the path she had walked. From abandonment to near death, from vultures circling above to the steady hand of a stranger. Her journey had changed her. She was no longer the woman left behind. She was stronger, wiser, and bound by an unexpected friendship. Samuel's presence had taught her that kindness could cross boundaries, that even in the harshest desert, compassion could bloom like a rare flower. As she closed her eyes, she realized her heart was no longer filled with despair. Instead, it carried a quiet hope, fragile but real. Tomorrow was uncertain, but she would not face it alone. Samuel had become more than her rescuer. He was her companion, her teacher, and perhaps the beginning of something greater than either of them had expected. The morning air was cool, the kind of gentle wind that carried a promise of change. Nayeli woke slowly, her body no longer frail but stronger than it had been in many weeks. She stretched her arms and felt the warmth of the fire that Samuel had already tended, before she even opened her eyes. He was always awake first, moving quietly, making sure the camp was safe. She sat up, watching him pour water into a small tin pot, the steam rising as the sun climbed over the desert hills. It was strange to think how far she had come since the day she had been left to die. Then she could barely walk or speak, her body broken and her spirit nearly gone. Now, though still thin, her strength had returned. She could stand tall again. She could walk on her own. She could even smile at the small victories of each day. Much of that had been possible only because of Samuel. He noticed her awake and gave her a small nod. He was not a man of many words, but his gestures always carried meaning. He handed her a piece of warm bread from his pack. She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. She whispered his name softly, Samuel, and he lifted his head, meeting her eyes. She then spoke her own name, Nayeli, as though reminding both herself and him of who she truly was. After they ate, Samuel packed his horse carefully. Nayeli helped now, tying straps, folding blankets, gathering wood for the next fire. She no longer watched as a weak traveler, but acted as his equal, doing her share. Samuel led her, never stopping her, never treating her as fragile anymore. That, more than anything, gave her pride. As they prepared to leave, Samuel turned to her with a serious look. He pointed eastward, where the land stretched into the distance. Then he pointed west toward another horizon. With his hands, he asked her, would she go back to her people or follow another path? The question had lingered in both their hearts for many days, and now it stood clear between them. Nayeli looked east, imagining the camp of her tribe. She saw the faces of those who had abandoned her, the fires they built, the songs they sang without her. She thought of her mother, silent and sorrowful on the day of her exile. Would her mother welcome her back with tears? Or had even she turned her heart away? Nayeli did not know. What she did know was the memory of being left alone, the sound of footsteps fading as she cried out for help. That wound was deep, and though her body had healed, her spirit carried its scar. Then she turned her gaze west, where Samuel's path led. It was unknown, uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges she could not yet imagine. But she knew this. Samuel had saved her when no one else would. He had shared his food, his fire, his horse, his strength. He had treated her not as a burden, but as a human being worthy of life. To walk with him was to walk into the unknown, but it was also to walk with respect. She stepped closer to him, touching her hand lightly to his chest, where his heart beat steady. Then she pointed west, her eyes firm. Samuel watched her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. He understood. The choice was made. She would not return to those who had abandoned her. She would build a new life, even if it meant leaving everything she had once known behind. The days ahead were not easy. The desert did not grow kinder simply because her heart had chosen a new path. There were still long stretches without water, nights when the wind howled, days when the heat pressed down like iron. Yet Nayeli no longer saw herself as helpless. She carried wood on her back, gathered plants for food, and guided Samuel to hidden springs only she knew from her people's teachings. When Samuel hunted, she cleaned what he brought, using the sharp knife he had once shown her how to hold. Together they survived. There were dangers too. Once a rattlesnake coiled near their camp, its rattle shaking in warning. Samuel moved to strike it, but Nayeli held him back, showing him a way to guide the creature away with a long branch rather than killing it. Another time they heard distant shouts, strangers passing near with rifles on their backs. Samuel pulled her close, hiding her in the shadows of rocks until the voices faded. She realized then that the world beyond her tribe held as much danger as it did promise. But with Samuel's presence beside her, she felt less afraid. Each night by the fire, their bond deepened. Their words grew more, their languages slowly blending. Nayeli learned more English, repeating the sounds carefully. Samuel tried Apache words, his voice awkward but sincere. Sometimes they laughed together when the words twisted on his tongue. Other times they sat in silence, letting the fire's glow and the desert's wide sky speak for them. One evening, Nayeli found herself telling him more of her past. She drew shapes in the sand, showing the mountains where her people once traveled, the river where she played as a child. She told of her father, a strong hunter who had died in a raid. She spoke of the songs her grandmother had sung, songs of courage and survival. Samuel listened with the same quiet respect he always gave. When she finished, he placed his hand over his chest and spoke softly, as if to say her story now lived with him too. In turn, Samuel shared pieces of himself. His words were slow, but she understood enough. He had traveled far, leaving behind a place of cold winters and crowded towns. He had chosen the desert for its silence, its space, its challenge. He carried memories that weighed heavy, though he did not speak them all. Nayeli did not need every detail to understand. His eyes told her enough. He was a man who had known loss just as she had. The more they shared, the more their lives seemed tied by invisible threads. She began to see that perhaps fate had placed him in her path not by accident, but by design. He had been her salvation when all seemed lost, and now together they had become stronger than either would have been alone. The desert changed slowly around them as they traveled. Hills gave way to grasslands, the dry earth offering more signs of life. Birds flew overhead and streams appeared more often, glittering under the sun. Nayeli breathed deeply, feeling her spirit grow lighter with every step westward. She was no longer walking into death. She was walking into a future. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and red, Samuel stopped his horse at the crest of a hill. He lifted Nayeli down gently, and together they looked at the land stretched wide before them. It was not the home she had known, nor the one he had left, but it was theirs to choose. For the first time since her exile, Nayeli felt free. She was not the abandoned woman left for vultures. She was Nayeli, strong, alive, and ready to walk her own path. Samuel stood beside her, silent as always, but she felt his steady presence like a promise. Whatever lay ahead, hardship or hope, they would face it together. She looked at him, her eyes bright with the reflection of the setting sun, and he looked back with a quiet certainty. The desert had once tried to claim her, but it had also given her something unexpected: a companion, a guide, a friend. In Samuel's presence, she had found not just survival but dignity, not just mercy but trust. Her tribe had cast her aside, but life had given her a second chance. And as the stars began to shine above, Nayeli knew her story was no longer one of abandonment, but of salvation and new beginnings.